Hello, class. This is Mr. Hart, and in this podcast, I want to go over week 3 of the atmosphere. And first of all, we want to start out by looking at how the Earth is able to stay so warm and support life and things like that. Okay, and what the atmosphere's role is in doing that. Okay, and so first of all, let's just look at the different temperatures around the Earth. Okay, and as you would expect, the areas around the equator are going to be warmest. Okay, and the poles are going to be the coldest. Right? Makes sense. If you think back to last June when we talked about the Earth's tilt, okay, and how direct the sunlight is, you'd know that the most direct sunlight is near the equator and near the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, and the least direct sunlight is near the poles. So it makes sense that the most direct sunlight, the most intense sunlight, is going to keep this part of the Earth warmer than that part of the Earth. Okay, and so the key here is that most of the warmth comes obviously from the sun, right? That's where we get our main heat source, is that sunlight. And so the intensity and the directness of that sunlight is going to determine how warm certain parts of the Earth are. Okay. Then we looked at solar radiation, which is just basically meaning sunlight. Okay, the different types of sunlight. If you remember from a previous science class, you probably learned about the different types of light, like UV, visible, infrared. There's also microwave and radio and gamma and X-ray. Okay, but if you look at this spectrum, is what it's called, a spectrum, it shows that most of the sunlight that reaches us isn't in the UV or the infrared, but most of it's in the visible spectrum. Okay, which is nice because um, that means that objects on the Earth are reflecting visible sunlight more, which means it makes them easier for us to see. Okay, and so this is good for us. That most of the sunlight that reaches us is in the visible spectrum. Okay, it's also warm enough to keep the planet warm and things like that. So this is good. Okay, but it turns out that if we just had sunlight and we didn't have an atmosphere, we wouldn't have enough heat to support life on Earth. Okay, we look more like the moon or Mars, right? These very cold, dry places. Okay, so what role does the atmosphere play in keeping us warm? And the answer to that question comes from an effect known as the greenhouse effect. Okay, so you may have heard of this before, but you can just think of like a regular greenhouse for a garden, right? During the colder months of the year, you put your plants in a greenhouse, right? Kind of just this glass box that traps in the sunlight, traps in the heat, and is able to let the plants grow. Okay, well, the atmosphere does the same thing for us. Okay, it acts like basically a large piece of glass. So sunlight comes in, okay, hits the atmosphere, it goes through and hits the earth. Okay, then that some of that sunlight's going to reflect off the earth, and so it's going to come back out. And if there was no atmosphere, just keep on going. Okay, but because there is an atmosphere, it's going to keep bouncing and being absorbed by the atmosphere, absorbed by the earth, okay, until it eventually dies out. Okay, so the atmosphere is able to trap in that heat, just like a greenhouse would. And so this makes it a lot warmer for us. It makes the temperature a lot more consistent. Okay, at nighttime the temperature only drops by a couple degrees, whereas if there was no atmosphere, it would drop by 100 degrees. Because you don't have any sunlight. Okay, so again, it keeps the conditions a lot more consistent. It keeps us a lot warmer. It's trapping in that heat. Okay, so we're really glad we have an atmosphere. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any life. Okay, and so again, as it's just bouncing through, it is reflected and absorbed, and that energy is trapped in as heat. Okay, and CO2 and other gases in the atmosphere is what's trapping in that heat. Okay, they act as these, this glass pane. You could think of it. Okay, this ability to trap in the heat. Okay, so we're glad we have this atmosphere again, so that we can trap in this heat. But let's talk about specifically what gases contribute most to our atmosphere, or contribute most to this effect in our atmosphere. Okay, so let's talk about carbon dioxide and ozone. Okay, carbon dioxide and ozone. So, sorry, a few typos on this slide. Okay, so carbon dioxide and ozone. So, these two gases are very important, but they kind of play different roles. Okay, so the formula for carbon dioxide is CO2, and the formula for ozone is O3. Okay, so I like to think of it in this way: CO2 or carbon dioxide, its job is to keep good stuff in the atmosphere. Okay, its job is to trap in heat. Okay, reflect heat back towards the earth. Okay, I like to think of it as, again, keeping the good stuff in. And ozone or O3's job is to keep bad stuff out. Okay, UV radiation, other things like that, that could be very harmful to humans. Okay, we'd have too much heat if we didn't have the ozone. Okay, too much intensity, and so O3 or ozone keeps out that UV radiation. Okay, that other harmful rays from the sun. So this is kind of nice. If we have a good balance of CO2 and O3, then our atmosphere is good and our temperatures are consistent. Okay, but historically and even presently, we have not been the best at making sure these um, gases are balanced in the atmosphere. So let's first of all, we're going to ignore CO2 for a second. We're going to talk more about carbon dioxide when we get to climates. But let's talk about ozone. Okay, let's talk about O3. So back in the 90s, okay, there was a lot of concern about something called the ozone hole, okay, and our contribution to the ozone hole. And so I recommend, highly, highly recommend, this video is very good, about how O3 keeps out UV radiation and what has contributed to the depletion of ozone, or what we call the ozone hole. Okay, so this video goes over what O3 does, how it got depleted back then, and what some of the problems were. And so that's really interesting to see back then. When you watch that video, it talks about something called CFCs. And so back in the 90s, CFCs were a very big deal because we started realizing that they were contributing to this depletion in the ozone. And we started figuring out the chemistry and realizing that they were kind of destroying ozone. And so there were a lot of regulations about CFCs and how we need to get rid of them. And fortunately, a lot of people complied. Okay, it's not really as much of a problem now, but it really started giving us this concern of, we can actually change our Earth's atmosphere. Okay, and we started getting some preliminary images of this ozone hole. Okay, and we could see that there's high concentration and low concentration. And so, again, people started questioning, how much are humans contributing to this? What are the effects? Is this natural? Is this, mostly human caused? Is this a process? And so you guys have probably heard of global warming before. This ozone hole is kind of the big start to all this concern about global warming and wondering, what are humans doing and what do we need to change? Okay. And so historically, a very interesting thing to look into and to see. But it's also interesting to see that there's still quite a few opinions. There's a lot of evidences about this ozone hole and a lot of theories and ideas. But when you look down to it, there's usually about three main ideas that people hold about the ozone, okay, and the ozone hole. Okay, some people just think there is no hole in the ozone. Okay, it's all just conspiracy. That's usually more of an extremist point of view. But some people believe there is a hole in the ozone, but it is naturally occurring. Okay, and there's lots of evidence for this. Okay, a lot of people, think that it's just kind of this cyclic process that happens over many, many years, where this hole be created, then regenerate, and then be recreated, then be depleted, and they'll just go through this process over many, many years. And so there's some evidence for this. Okay, some people think that there is a hole in the ozone, and humans are mostly responsible for it. So these are kind of the two big ones. Is the ozone hole naturally occurring, or is it, a human caused thing? And so again, it's interesting to see something so important as like this is obviously going to have lots of opinions about it, and there is a lot of concern and questioning about these ideas even still today. What can humans do? What is the atmosphere doing? Is it, again, natural? Is it human caused? And so I could give you my opinion on this, but I want you to kind of form your own opinion for yourselves. Okay, so you should have gone the writing assignment in my class. If not, you can look on that or look on the website for that. But basically, want you just to find some articles for each of the opinions. Okay, read them and find some arguments. Form your own opinion, and then write an essay about why you have the opinion you do. Okay. So again, things like global warming, things like the ozone hole. I can tell you what I think, but it's not going to do as much as if you form your own opinion from your reading and your experiences and things like that. Okay. And so that is all we covered for this week. But very important topic. I hope you find lots of interest in this topic and really go and do some good research on it and form your own opinions about these ideas. Okay. But hopefully that made sense. Let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for watching.